You know how Fox has a weird way of counting Simpsons episodes? They refuse to count a couple of them, making the amount of episodes inconsistent. The reason for this is a lost episode from season 1. Finding details about this missing episode is difficult. No one who was working on the show at the time likes to talk about it. From what has been pieced together, the lost episode was written entirely by Matt Groening. During production of the first season, Matt started to act strangely. He was very quiet, seemed nervous, morbid, mentioning this to anyone who was presenting results, and them very angry and forbidding you to ever mention it to Matt. The episode's production number was 7G44. The title was Dead Bart. In addition to getting angry, asking anyone who was on the show about this will cause them to do everything they can to stop you from directly communicating with Matt. At a fan event, I managed to follow him after he spoke to the crowd, and eventually had a chance to talk with him alone. As he was leaving the building, he didn't seem upset that I followed him, probably expected the typical encounter with an obsessive fan. When I mentioned the lost episode though, all the color drained from his face, and he started trembling. When I asked him if I could tell him of any details of this episode, he sounded like he was on the verge of tears. He grabbed a piece of paper, wrote something on it, and handed it to me. He begged me never to mention the episode ever again. The piece of paper was a website address. I would rather not say what it was for. Reasons you'll see in a second. I entered the address into my web browser. I came to a site that was completely blank, except for a line of yellow text, a download link. I clicked on it, and the file started downloading. Once the file was downloaded, my computer went crazy. It was the worst virus I'd ever seen. System restore didn't work. The entire computer had been rebooted. Before doing this, I copied the file onto a CD. I tried opening it on my empty computer, and as I suspected, there was the episode of The Simpsons on it. The episode started off like any other episode, but had a very poor quality animation. If you've seen the original animation of Some Enchanted Evening, it was similar, but less stable. The first act was fairly normal. By the way, the character's acting was a little off. Homer seemed angrier, Marge seemed depressed, Lisa seemed anxious, Bart seemed to have a genuine anger and hatred for his parents. This episode was talking about the Simpsons going on a plane trip. Near the end of the first act, the plane was taking off. Bart was fooling around, as he expected. However, as the plane was about 50 feet off the ground, Bart broke a window on the plane and was sucked out. At the beginning of the series, Matt had an idea that he animated style of The Simpsons world represented life, and that death turned things more realistic. This was used in this episode. The pictures of dead Bart's corpse were barely recognizable. They looked to full advantage of it not having to move, and made an almost photorealistic drawing of his dead body. Act 1 ended with the shot of dead Bart's corpse. When Act 2 started, Homer, Marge, and Lisa were sitting all in their table crying. Their crying went on and on. It got more pain and sounded more realistic. Better acting than you would think possible. The animation started to decay even more as they cried. You could hear murmuring in the background. This crying went on for all the Act of 2. Act 3 opened with a little card saying 1 year has passed. Marge, Homer, and Lisa were skeletally thin and still sitting on the table. There was no sign of Mage or the pets. They decided to visit Bart's grave. Springfield was completely deserted, and as they walked to the cemetery, the houses became more and more decrepit. They all looked abandoned. When they got to the grave, Bart's body was just laying there in the front of his tombstone, looking just like it did at the end of Act 1. The family started crying and crying again. Eventually they stopped and just stared at Bart's body. The camera zoomed in on Homer's face. According to summaries, Homer tells a joke at this part, but isn't audible in the version I saw. You can't tell what Homer is saying. The view zoomed out of the episode came to a close. The tombstones in the background had the names of every Simpson guest star on them. Some of them haven't been on the show yet. All of them had death dates on them for the guests who died since, like Michael Jackson and George Harrison. The dates were when they would die. You can try to use the tombstones to predict the death of the living Simpsons guest stars, but there's odd about one of the most who haven't died yet. All of their deaths are listed as the same date.